at the time, I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm being treated by a man how I've always dreamed of being treated. We're traveling over the world and parties with all sorts of people, experiences just beyond my wildest dreams. I will never feel that again. And that makes me sad because it was the most amazing feeling of my life. The depth of the connection I had with this person. And then I think what makes me even sadder is knowing that it was all just a lie, a manipulation. That person doesn't exist.
This is Hear Her, a podcast where women who have been told to be quiet find their voices. Before we meet today's guest, a word to listeners. This episode may include explicit descriptions of abuse and violence. If you're not in a place of physical or emotional safety, please consider listening at another time. Hear Her is an educational platform, not therapy, and provides no psychological guidance. I'm Dee Donaldson, writer, educator and clinical psychologist, and I'll be your host. Welcome to Hear Her. A brief warning before we begin. This episode includes discussion of coercive control, emotional abuse, gaslighting, reproductive pressure, threats and trauma. Please listen with care. Today's guest is speaking anonymously. Her image and voice have been altered and some identifying details have been changed to protect her privacy. What unfolds in this conversation is a deeply personal account of being chosen, idealised, controlled, disbelieved and ultimately forced to fight her way back to herself. If you've ever found yourself asking, is it really that bad? This episode may stay with you. Here is Stella. Welcome, Stella. Welcome to Hear Her.
Thanks so much.
In our phone conversation earlier, you shared with me a bit about your story and specifically the long-term relationship that you'd had with a well-known athlete. I wondered if you would be willing to share a little about what that woman was like before she met him.
I had been in a long-term relationship, a marriage, for almost 12 years. And he was lovely, just absolute sweetheart. He's the father of my daughter, thankfully, and just a great guy, lovely guy. And our relationship was very consistent. We realized that we were growing apart more than anything, and eventually we did decide to separate. So I was looking forward to having freedom. I was anxious a little bit and scared about it too, about what being a single mother looked like, about what being newly single after such a long time. There were dating apps now, they were never around before, to exploring my sexual side. All of these things, I think, as a woman, that we're told or that we're expected to sort of give up in a relationship. I was so green and so naive coming out of that relationship that it was very exciting, but it's very overwhelming as well.
And so you've got this naive, excited young girl that's looking for autonomy to get to know herself. You've come from a fairly safe relationship.
Too safe, yeah. I was definitely craving excitement. I am quite a confident person. I had enjoyed, starting to date. The attention was obviously very nice after such a long relationship, and I really just wanted a time to be a little bit selfish and to go, what do I want? Where do I want to go?
And so you met the athlete. Tell me about that first meeting.
So we met online. I didn't think anything of it. I was sort of seeing quite a few people, or just going out for drinks with a few people at the time, and met him. And yeah, look, to start with, it wasn't like this fireworks kind of thing. We met somewhere and had a few drinks, and he wasn't like this overtly charming or debonair or enticing kind of person. He was just a guy. And I left that thinking, I might see him again, might not. I was definitely just looking for fun at that stage. And so, yeah, I remember he walked me to my car and kissed me. I'm like, oh, that was terrible kiss. I'm not really that interested. And then he was persistent. I sort of made a vague plan to go, yeah, we'll catch up for another drink. And I cancelled 2 times on him. And then the third time on the day we were meant to meet, he's like, listen, just so you know, if you cancel today, there won't be another opportunity. Yeah. So we went for a drink and ended up back at his house. And yeah, it was very intense, very intense
I,
physically.
I remember that you joked a little bit about that there was something when you had met him. What was it that you saw and that you ignored?
I believe it was something I honestly, I've been racking my brain, but I absolutely distinctly looked at him. I said, oh, you're a sociopath then. Oh, this is going to be interesting. It's not going to work on me, but good luck in trying. Which I look back now and I just laugh because that's just like waving a red flag at a bull, isn't it? I believe it was something
Yeah.
around empathy. It wasn't as hardcore as being a complete monster in any way, but there was an instance, something he said, and I just went, oh, you're a sociopath then. But yeah, I can't tell you the example of what it was, but it wasn't anything like, he used to drown cats or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? It was something
Mm.
subtle that I picked up on. He sort of shut it down, going, no, I'm the sort of guy that will, you know, and his public persona is very important. So I think he pulled out a few, I've done this, I've done that, I've helped these people, I've helped that people, to sort of squash my observation.
What was it like in those early days to be with somebody that had a reasonably high profile?
It wasn't a profile thing per se, but it was the early stages of really those love bombing. I now know the
Okay.
terminology at the time, but at the time I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm being treated by a man how I've always dreamed of being treated. His profile wasn't big enough that we would walk down the street, but within a particular sporting community, he was obviously quite involved and known with and still works in. He definitely tapped into my desire to have a much bigger life. And that's exactly what happened within, gosh,
Yeah.
3 months.
Mm.
We're traveling
Yeah.
over the world and parties with all sorts of people, experiences just beyond my wildest dreams.
What would you identify as the difference between those two relationships?
Completely different,
Mm.
chalk and cheese. Going from did you shop at Aldi today or Coles to I noticed you're a bit tired at the moment. I booked you a day at a J Spa. That sort of consideration and generosity in his new relationship made me feel safe in a completely different way. And he was this life raft to go, I've got you, it's fine. And his confidence within himself and within me completely changed me as a person. Within 3 months, I'd gone from not really leaving the house to cave diving in Mexico, just being this person that I thought had died, that I was when I was in my late teens and 20s, this more outgoing, adventurous, fun, personable person. And I think during that process with a new relationship, they do ask a lot of questions. They want to see who they can become to be that perfect person for you and to provide for you what you need. And that happened really quickly,
I
very
can hear the
quickly.
hindsight coming
And
in
there
there.
was,
If we
yeah,
just, I might just slow this down. Is that all right?
sure.
I'm thinking back to those first heady months of traveling to Mexico and being so attentive to your needs. And I'm wondering what it felt like for you to feel chosen.
Like, I will never feel that again. And that makes me sad because it was the most amazing feeling of my life. I can't believe I'm getting upset about it now. But
That's
I
okay.
I think that coming from a place where I had very busy working parents and was never really seen or chosen as someone, I've sort of always felt like either an afterthought or in many ways emotionally quite lonely in my marriage, not being understood. And obviously, chronic illness takes its toll. So to have someone of a stature, I guess, he was wealthy. We would go places people would know him. We would travel and be overseas and go to these, and he would know all these people and other athletes overseas and hanging out with bigger named people and taking me shopping in New York and buying my first pair of Manolo Blahniks and this Cinderella story that this just handsome, wealthy man picked me up, really swept me off my feet. I thought I was living a fairy tale. It was my dream. It was the sort of thing that I had spent so long in my head growing up of what true love looks like and what that connection for someone who is inherently quite a lonely person. Even if I'm around 50 people, I still feel quite alone. To not feel lonely anymore, to
Intoxicating.
feel like my other half, my kindred spirit, my twin flame, all of those sorts of things that I had never felt. Sorry, I didn't
That's
mean
okay.
to get so emotional about that. I don't think I've ever really talked about in that way.
Having somebody intentionally reflect back to you the vulnerability of sharing those needs with somebody that you trusted, and then that becomes
Yeah.
weaponized. As much as the humor is protective, the grief, the anger.
My God, I never acknowledged that.
You mentioned earlier that before your first marriage, yeah, that younger, the 18-year-old, she was vibrant. She knew what she wanted.
I know what he was like and stuff, but I sometimes wish I could go back and stay and not leave him.
It makes sense because that is the trauma bond. Just because we end and we choose to leave because we know it's the safer thing to do for ourselves, that doesn't mean that that is not already created.
I know, and I tell myself that all the time. It wasn't true love, it was a manipulation. It's hard when you still miss that person desperately. It's been a
Yeah.
very long time, and I've
Mm.
done a lot of healing, as you say. But I think every time, you allow yourself the space to actually delve into it again, what it sort of brings up. I did a lot of work on myself afterwards. I did a lot of reading. I, can intellectualize and understand it all on a intellectual level, but the emotional pain never really sort of ceases, I think. The depth of the connection I had with this person. And then I think what makes me even sadder is knowing that it was all just a lie, a manipulation. That person doesn't exist, creating this persona to draw me in the
Yeah.
things I wanted, but you can still miss something that you felt, even if it's,
Helen. Yeah.
not necessarily real.
What you felt was real.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing. And I'll never experience it again, nor do I really want to, because I am obviously aware of what it means, but you can't try and sort of contextualize an emotion or a feeling and then intellectualize it and understand it, but it doesn't dissipate anything of that actual original emotion.
Was there ever a moment in those first several months where something didn't quite sit right with you?
No, not the first few months.
Not the first few months?
He had gone away to Sunshine for a few months, and he flew me over to spend those last few weeks with him, traveling all around, having the most amazing time. And it was when we got back, and it was our first proper fight. I think we'd probably been together by this stage about 6 months. And we were moving in together. He moved into my apartment. And yeah, I remember the first fight, the facade dropped and he yelled and I think he called me one name. And I don't come from a family of name calling or yelling or raising your voice or anything like that. And I definitely had not come from relationships like that. So that was very confronting to me. I distinctly remember my daughter was there and she was about sort of 3.5 at this stage. And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. And I just met his family and I was upset because I just went and I started crying because I knew in my head that that's a deal breaker. I'm not going to be in a volatile relationship. That's not who I am. And I was just thinking to myself, all right, well, this is over. And I said something about the relationship being over. And he just switched back instantly. Oh, what are you talking about? Oh, I'm so sorry, honey. It's just, the stress and I'm just recalibrating and moving house and blah, blah, blah. And it's just a lot and really just downplayed the whole thing. And of course, get that back again. And, this is just a name call. But I think that shocked him, though, as well, because I was willing to go, all right, well, we're done. We're done with this. So he had to tread a lot more carefully from there on in. And then it was a very slow and intense period of reaffirming that bond and really spending again that second wave of excitement had worn off. You with someone 6 months, the honeymoon periods, kind of slowly, but it reignited that. Absolutely. It was everything back again to sort of really draw me back in and to secure that relationship.
And what happened?
We moved in together and I had been working, but it was just a part-time role in an office that wasn't really something I wanted to continue with. And there was something that he was doing as part of his role. And I'd always had a huge interest in that space. He said, why don't you become this? And I said, it's very hard to get work and, I'm not qualified. It's like, you get a qualification, go and do, 12 months of study and I'll get you a job in this space, a very competitive space, particularly at that level, and the opportunities that a little bit of nepotism brings from knowing all of the people in an industry and being able to do a role like this. I've since gone on to get further qualifications since, but I unwittingly allowed another avenue of control to come in, of him rescuing me and me going, oh, I'm so grateful. He ended up being in control of my career. And that was a whole other sort of story. My previous relationship was just get a 9 to 5 job, work in an office, just be normal like everyone else, So to then meet someone that was so encouraging, a new career path for me and supportive. And I didn't have any sort of financial pressures either, which was amazing. We'd been together, gosh, I'm going to say 9 or 10 months. And we were in New York and it was snowing and ice skating through Central Park. And that's where we got engaged. He proposed in the snow in Central Park and then said, let's go to the Diamond District and pick you out a rock and celebrate it at the plaza with champagne. I think he was going to propose until he saw me get upset that he hadn't proposed because he had been hinting for ages. And, they sort of hint and then they sort of trying to get your read on things. And so when he saw I was visibly disappointed, he raced out and got a little fake ring and did it in the park before we chose the real ring.
Were there any other indications, anything
fights,
that didn't feel right? Yeah. What were they like?
We'd have fights. They weren't great, but they weren't anywhere near what they ended up becoming. I was still fairly easily manipulated at that stage. And he would say it was all about me and not contributing as much financially. What he led me to believe was you don't have to worry about this ever, but you still need to work because it's good for you. I said, yeah, I absolutely want to work. I think most of the fights were just around that. I do recall one bad fight before we got engaged or maybe just after. We were going to one of my friends' birthdays. And this is when I first noticed this happening. Anytime we were going to an event of one of my friends or family, there would be some sort of fight leading into it. He would ruin it. And I mentioned that there was going to be a guy that I'd hooked up with a couple of times there. And he just lost his shit. I'm like, what is going on? What is going on here? And now I know that my friend's being there and he doesn't have the control of his group. He's not feeling as in control when it's around people that he doesn't know, or there's a much bigger scope for uncertainty for him when he's not controlling the environment. So that was a pattern that did develop every time it was my friends, my family, and losing quite a few friends throughout the relationship. And yeah, we had this huge fight. He was saying things and he was doing the word salad, and I was just, what are you trying to say? Putting words in my mouth, all of that sort of stuff. So by the time we got there, I was just numb, like absolutely numb. It was a friend's birthday, and I was just so broken. And we ended up sitting by ourselves most of the night. I didn't really talk to anyone. I didn't really do anything. I was just broken. He didn't want me socializing with these other people or doing things. He got so jealous and so incensed from it all, but he just broke me down. It's like, come on, let's go. That another level of control is me not being with my friends. That became a bit of a trend. And every trip we took as well on the way home, picking a fight. And I started to call him out on it. I started to call him out on these things. And I said, I'm not engaging because this is what you're doing. I said, you're doing this for a reason. And he didn't like that. He didn't like, I'm good with pattern recognition. And I could see these patterns developing, but I didn't know what they meant. At the time, he was always brilliant with my daughter, that I would never have stayed if she was affected anyway. She adored him and he adored her. And that was a huge part of it as well. He manipulated her, I look back now, into being this amazing person for her, and another level of manipulation of why I can't leave. Because, think about your daughter, how much she loves him and their relationship. But I did notice anytime it was around my friends, my family, and events and holidays, if we were going somewhere, he would always ruin it. He would pick a fight with me. And then on the way back from holidays, obviously, because he wanted to have a great time on the trip, but always on the way back from holidays. And I remember it very, very succinctly one time, him doing that. And I just looked at him, I said, why do you do this? We've just had the best 2 weeks. Why are you in a plane picking a fight with me over absolutely nothing? And he smirked at me. I don't think he thought I saw it, but he did a little smirk, like, of recognition. And I just went, yep, you're evil. Anyone that would do that kind of thing, I've hit a pattern, or I've seen him. We got engaged about 10 months in, and then that was sort of the start of the year, and then we were married later in the year, so probably another 10 months. We'd had a really big fight the night before. He was going out with his mate. And I go, we're getting married tomorrow. He's like, don't worry about it. And he had a tendency to go out for a very long period of time. And there was a few other things, or I think I said I was going out. He's like, you can't go out, or something like that. We had a huge fight. And I was very rattled, and I didn't sleep well. And he wasn't there. And I remember having a coffee with my mum in the morning going, I don't think I can do this. She said, darling, it's going to cause a huge scene if you don't. So I'm sure everything's fine. But I remember my body just screaming at me, don't do this. This is not the right thing to do. And I remember my head going, no, that's just the entirety of my life has been like that, just to be what everyone else expects me to be, to fit into their version of what they want me to be. Do you know what I mean? It was a little bit backhanded. So I felt pressure. I felt that pressure and responsibility to go through with it. And she said, you love this person. And I said, yes, I do. But I can't keep going through this level of this just exhausting, completely. This is the right thing to do. We love this person. Look at our life. I've got everything I could ever dream of, plus a career that was very much tied into him. We'd always had chemistry, but I think whenever you have intense physical chemistry with someone, now I know that's a red flag. It's, that cycle of intensity and that dopamine sort of roller coaster that comes with these kind of people is intoxicating, completely intoxicating, but it's not healthy. And yeah, I just sort of felt at that stage it was kind of there, but I was tired. I'd been having more health problems. Huge part of our relationship was his desire to have children. which I wanted also. And it was looking like I would be having fertility problems, if not more than that. He was fine after a fight. He could snap right out of it, but it just chipped away at me so much. I'm such an empathetic person. I was taking on so much of the emotion around this, and just that sort of slowly breaking me down each step was a lot. And, that wedding night, I completely wrote myself off. Completely.
What,
People had flown in from overseas, and it was just a massive party. And we ended up getting kicked out of the hotel and going back to our house. And I just completely wrote myself off to the point where I had one of my girlfriends take me to my room to bed. And he came up and said, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, she's not okay." And he's like, "Oh, she'll be right." And he's like, "The boys are going to go back out." And so he didn't come home that night until the next day. That was my wedding night with a girlfriend by my side. But oh shit, the regret. What have I done? Hating those feelings inside me that were going, this probably isn't a good idea. I know I loved him, but it wasn't right. It was starting to make me question my own sanity at times.
and when he disappeared
Mm.
on the wedding night and didn't come back, what were you telling yourself?
I did tell myself the story. I know he would always choose his mates and appearances. Appearances are always huge with these. Having a lot of these friends of his flown in, having that hotel suite, he just said, "Oh, the boys all just went back and we just kicked on," and that was it. And I think you get to a point where you're so defeated and you're so numb. I didn't have the energy to question things. I think he could have been doing anything, and I have absolutely no idea. But the fact that I was not okay and he knew that I was not okay, I think was punishment leaving me there.
I'm wondering, because I know how much your daughter matters to you, that if
Yeah,
you imagine yourself at your daughter's wedding and she told you that her husband had disappeared for a couple of days on the wedding night when she'd been feeling really unwell, what would you have told her?
I would be absolutely fucking appalled and just and disappointed. I'm raising my child to never be in that situation. My child at the age of 3 knew her worth. Yeah, I'm teaching her to trust her instincts, which I think are not acknowledged as much as they should be, particularly women's intuition. But I would be horrified.
I'm wondering when you first realised that there was a problem.
He tried to convince me that I was bipolar. He didn't know that I had quietly gone to see a psychiatrist a few times. And I had said at the end of the 3 sessions, my bipolar. And she looked at me, and this was the first time I'd even considered this. And she said, "No, but you're in an abusive relationship." And I went, but he doesn't hit me, as we all go, but he doesn't hit me. And she went, "No, not all of them do." And she went through a whole list of things with me. And I had been having some issues hormonally and was eventually diagnosed with PMDD. And he ran like the wind with that one. That was every fight we had, everything we did was, "Oh, it's because of your PMDD, because of this, because of that." And luckily, I'd had my best friends had gone through her PMDD journey and diagnosis, and she was a great resource for me, as was an online community. And so, despite me not having bipolar, as soon as I got a PMDD diagnosis, that was enough for him to ride with. And so anything that went or happened in the relationship was PMDD, to the point where I was like, "Oh, it's totally me. I'm so sorry." I did become consumed by it for a period of time. At least a year was trying to find some help for me. And he really sort of played on that diagnosis and me being the cause for all of these sorts of issues. And him sort of saying, your baby can't trust what you're feeling right now, what you're thinking right now. So it was the perfect tool and something he could weaponize so beautifully. I never felt like I had it that badly though in my gut, but I think it was definitely exacerbated and definitely played on. And that combined with having some reproductive issues and things really started to take a turn then. I was working for him. He was my direct report at a well known sporting club at an elite level. And I pushed back a bit against him and rebelled sometimes because I hated that level of control. There was a lot of financial control as well that I wasn't contributing enough. We'd made financial decisions in terms of the house we bought. I said, I can't pay half the mortgage for this sort of house. And he was like, no, no, don't worry about it. But then he would use that against me. So it was really that I was trapped financially and career wise and very ensconced in his life and his family. And my child just adored him. And that was very hard. So a lot of the things I thought, you know what, if I could provide her with this amazing life and opportunity, and she wasn't aware of it being so young of what was happening. Yeah, it was just had to go with the flow. I'm not one that can just keep my mouth or my facial expressions quiet with these sorts of things. So I would push back. And then around the whole reproductive issue, and things got a lot worse from him when that happened. I had to go through a very intense period of medical injuries plus treatment. So I'm being put into medical menopause whilst that's happening, trying to still work and be normal, of working for him as a contractor. So we did have a lot of that flexibility and I didn't have that financial pressure. However, the more we went on, the worse he got, the more the fights came up, the more vicious he got in his wording and the
Vicious.
frequency. I think most people that have gone through this understand when I say the eyes turn black and it's like you're looking at a void almost of a person. It's quite confronting. But I saw that more and more. And I think as resentment built, because all he wanted was a child. I did really want another child, but it wouldn't have been as a big a thing. I do not begrudge him that. Day dot, first date, he said he wanted a child. I understood that. It was just unfortunate of what happened. But then he was definitely using it, and things were getting worse and worse within the marriage. Once I had gone through medical, they were saying that I needed a hysterectomy, and I had all of these cysts that I think it was very much utilized by him as a fantastic scapegoat and tool to control. I went into 2 rounds of IVF. We were going to try and get a surrogate. And, they were very risky for me. I had lights and sirens ambulance one night from hyperstimulation syndrome. That was a pretty full-on period for me to go from medical menopause straight to IVF. That plays a toll mentally, which I'm sure it did on him as well. I'm very willing to admit my part in the downfall of our relationship. The downfall of our relationship was essentially because he is a narcissistic, sociopath, abusive, whatever you want to call it. That was why I left. But I think it would be remiss of me to say, oh, I was perfect. No, of course not. Relationships are never perfect, and there's always two people. But I think if this was a standard or more healthier relationship, those hurdles you overcome.
I'm hearing accountability and insight from you into understanding the complexities of why women choose to stay. There's many, many reasons. I'm also hearing that you're able to own that accountability. Can you recall times where he would own his own part?
Every single apology was, look, I'm sorry, but there was always the but. You did this or you did that, or I did this because of you doing this, or, there was always that sort of explanation, or if you just do this, then this wouldn't happen. I only hit you because I love you. If you stop doing this, it won't happen. Yes. So, no.
Stella, you mentioned about seeing that psychiatrist and that she had said to you that you're not mentally ill, you're in an abusive relationship. What did that do for you at the time?
So much. Because I was doubting myself. I was doubting my own sanity by this stage. You know,
Mm.
the person that's closest to you in life and the person that you loved and trusted was saying these things to you. And you do sort of start to question it. We had seen a counsellor before we got married. We went a few times, but it was just an absolute shit show. The therapist called me and she went, "I'm really sorry, but I can't help you." And I said to her, I said, "Well, we benefit from going to someone else." And she just went, "No, I don't think she would." At the time, I was like, "Oh, that's strange." And now I look back and I go, well, that makes sense. She obviously identified what sort of person he was. I have an inherent need for understanding things and for justice. And I thought if we could actually go back through a few of our issues and talk them through and try and understand each other's side. And that just didn't happen. That was completely bamboozled by this word salad. And, why are you always looking backwards? You're so negative. Why can't you think for the future? And, no matter how much explaining I had to do around the reasoning, it was just met with the same response each time. So I do not begrudge her having to leave. And I know she is not really allowed to say anything more than that when you go for couples therapy.
There is a lot of research to suggest that if somebody is in any type of relationship that involves abuse, whether that be psychological, emotional,
Mm.
sexual, financial, or physical, that therapy can
Yeah,
be unhelpful. I can hear that you were trying to fix and to work through a relationship in the hope that it would get better.
absolutely. I was
Mm.
constantly trying to come up with ways of trying to make our relationship healthy. I would say, "Do you know what? At night, let's not talk about anything heavy." He would always try and bring shit up right before I was about to go to sleep. When I did leave and I started researching, and I just went, holy moly, just so many things were just textbook, ruining family events or ruining birthdays or things that are more focused around me where they didn't be either the center of attention or in control of the situation. They didn't have their people or their sort of element of control there. Walking ahead of me. That one absolutely shocked me. He would always walk ahead. My daughter and I and he were going for a walk, and he would always walk a few steps ahead. That was a huge one. Nighttime, picking right before bed, knowing that I wouldn't sleep, and I would ruminate things like that, controlling my sleep. He was an early riser, and I am not, and I'm more of a night owl. And so he would say, "We have to go to bed together so we can cuddle." So I'd have to go to bed at the same time as him. I would read, and more often than not, he would use that time to sort of at me. Obviously, holidays, end of holidays, things like that was a big one. So they were all things that I was reading about, and I just went, "Oh my gosh." I had never considered this to be that. I had my instincts and my suspicions, but there were so many little things that I read about after the fact that were written there black and white.
How did you finally leave?
I tried to leave once. I spoke about leaving often. We spoke about how much money I would get if I left very often. That was brought up all the time. Every time I looked slowly getting bad, he would, as they sort of wheel you back in. I had tickets to a concert this one time, my favorite artist at the time, when I was desperate to go. He picked a fight, and it was a really, really bad one. And I didn't end up going to the concert. And I tried to leave that day because it got so bad. I said, "That's it, I'm done, I'm leaving." And then it was this whole, "You can't do that." It was just, "I'm sorry, I'm tired, I'm stressed. You did this, and you shouldn't do this because you know how I get when you do that," and, all the rest of it. And as my sort of reproductive issues were worsening, and at 35, I was going to go into menopause, I came out of surgery and I was in my room recovering. He was sitting in the corner in the shadows. I remember just sort of being able to see him in the shadows in the corner. He had the black eyes and he just went, "You knew." And I go, "What? What are you talking about?" And he said, "You knew you needed a hysterectomy this whole time, and that was your game. You never wanted to give me a child." And I'm literally recovering from major surgery going, all I wanted was a child. Look at the lengths I've gone to try and have a child, with you. It's serious, for my health. And he went, no, you knew this was all around. You're money grabbing something, you're a gold digger. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was having a nightmare coming out of this anesthesia. And he went, you just knew. And he got up and walked out, and he didn't come to see me in hospital. And my first husband had to help me get home and get up the stairs. And he put me and tucked me into bed. And he said, this is not okay. And that was just a huge moment. Like, he just looked me in the eyes, and like, I'm so grateful to have such a beautiful first husband and father of my child. So yeah, that was horrific. And I kind of just threw myself into finding a surrogate because I was so desperate to show him that he was wrong and that I wanted this too. And I became obsessed with finding a surrogate. I went on all the chat rooms. I was speaking to all these surrogates. We looked at international surrogacy and all of that sort of stuff. It must have cost, like, it just cost so much money. We ended up going through commercial surrogacy overseas. So we ended up finding a surrogacy lawyer and finding a surrogate in Eastern Europe and sending over embryos, and going through that process, which obviously takes time. I think we went through a process of around maybe 9 months with every failed attempt for having a baby. Every time we found out that the transfer wasn't successful, things would get a little bit worse, to the point where it's pretty much the last 6 months of our relationship. I was recording our conversations when we were actually sort of discussing things, because the gaslighting, I thought I was going insane, but I felt just shocked at the level of things, and my hormones settled, and I was magically one of the people that recovered just beautifully from my hysterectomy. And I got on some HIT and was really good really quick. I was so focused on that recovery and making sure that was okay. And he didn't have that. You're crazy, you've got PMDD, or you're on hormones, or you're, going through IVF, to sort of fall on as an excuse for my behavior anymore. So I felt like I was thinking really clearly for the first time in years. And so I started recording everything that we said when it looked to be a serious conversation. And I actually found them the other week. I was clearing out the hard drive, and very confronting hearing a lot of those again. Very confronting, even after such a long time. So we found out that our final embryo didn't work. That meant we had no more eggs. So I was done. So we started looking at getting an egg donor, finding one from Russia or something like that. And things just got really bad. Prior to all of this, he would always win me back, convince me to stay, win me back. But he wasn't doing that anymore. He wasn't present. He wasn't engaged. He wasn't, all the rest of it. And I distinctly remember one night I said to him, I said, I don't think I love you anymore. And I think that was it for him. He just went, right, time to work out the next step. So things got really, really bad between us. So 6 weeks, pretty much 7 weeks between, things just got really, really bad. I said I'm leaving him. It was actually in a work situation, and I think he just thought I was, I'd said it a million times before, but I think I did it in that way just because it had to be done. And, my daughter was getting a little bit older, and still very young, but enough to know now that to hear things and to understand a little bit more. And I just went, I cannot raise my child in an environment where she thinks it is okay to talk to someone like that, or that a relationship like this is normal. And that was ultimately my breaking point. And it's just like, all right, now you've got to leave. You're not committed in any way. You can get out now. And so I did. And his world ended, and he was crying and tried to win me back. I knew in my heart of hearts that I had to switch off everything, put the blinkers on, and just go, you have to leave. Do not listen to anything. Just go. Do whatever you need to do, no matter how hard it is, or how sad you are, or anything like that. Just go, because my gut was screaming, run like fucking hell. So I found a house, and it was nowhere near the level of house that I had been living in with him. There was a huge element of the financial aspect and my lifestyle that he thought I would never leave. You know, he was my boss, so I'd have to leave my job. All the connection with his family, the beach house, and the family environment. And so I was in the house and I just started crying, you know, and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my life. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was leave that relationship, because I did still love him, but I knew that it wasn't right. And for whatever reason, my gut was just saying, you've got to run, get out of here. But I knew my life was not going to be easy if I stayed and not be able to give him a child. And the way things were going, things were not good. And they were only going to get worse. So, yeah, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. And he would still come over occasionally. We'd have messy sex, and that head emotion is like, come on, you know, come back to me, that trying to engage in that emotion. And I remember it happening once and him walking away, and I saw him walk past the window after he left, and he did that smirk again. He did the, got her, you know, I've still got her controlled, that smirk. And I just went, that's it, done. I was letting him see my child. Obviously, they'd had a relationship for most of her life, for as long as she could remember. And then she would come back and she'd start saying some things. And I went, nah. I said, I'm cutting you off. Boom, that's it. Nah. I was so focused on her, and that really is what saved me. She absolutely saved me through that whole process of how hard that was. And my sole focus and every single bit of my energy was just on her, almost making sure she was okay, getting the transition. And then when she was in bed, I would just wail, just cry under my doona every single night, cry myself to sleep, and start dating, because that's how I dealt with things in the past, just to distract myself, which was not the right move. It was only 4 years, but I lived 20 years in those 4 years. It was the best 4 years of my life and the worst 4 years of my life, is how I refer to it. Just initially, it was feeling that connection, finding that person that you read about in books, someone that knew you and chose you and connected with you. And that feeling of just utter, insanely, you know, heavy love that I had never experienced before and will never experience again, because it's not real. And it's all those hormones, the oxytocins and the dopamines, and you know, he was brilliant at tapping into that. And it was almost like I felt like I was on drugs or something, because it just consumed me as a person to start with. And I just couldn't believe how lucky I was, you know. He didn't think I'd throw it all away. I think if I hadn't have had those prior health problems before we met and had the strength to really push myself from a long recovery through that, I don't think I would have had the strength to leave him. But I genuinely believe that I realized how strong I was through recovering from serious illness, and then listening to my gut to a point where I had no other option. But it was still, leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was this toxic cycle of just insane highs and lows, intertwined with amazing experiences and travel and meeting these incredible people and their friends. And I was smart enough to know about what my life would look like afterwards and how much I'd have to sacrifice. And I did. So while he was still trying to get me back, it turns out he had someone living there. And I found out in a very traumatic way. He was still trying to get me back that whole time. I found out that he had been seeing someone whilst we were still together. I'm not sure how long it was going on for, but I believe it was when he suspected that I was going to leave. But yeah, he had someone lined up, and I was no use to him anymore without a uterus, a working reproductive system. So he did push me to the point of having to leave. All while still fucking with my head and you know, trying to get me back, of course. I was not doing well when I had my child with me, I was 100% focused on her. But when I did not have her, when she was with her dad, I was not doing well. And I was just trying to meet people. I was just trying to go out and write myself off just to sort of deal with it. Very unhealthy, I'm aware. I did it for a short period before getting proper help. But I had met a guy and I'd been out after a long lunch with some girlfriends, and he oddly tried to get a lot of information from me. He was really, really interested in my marriage breakdown. And I was a bit tipsy and I thought, oh, this is so nice. He's really caring and he's really concerned about what I've just been through. And I was probably just trauma dumping a little bit. And because, guys they don't want to hear about all that sort of stuff. And he's like, yes, I'm sort of going through it with my wife. But he was asking a lot. I had to go pick up some things. And I was on the phone to this guy planning on going out for dinner or something with. There was a box by the door. And I was like, I was on the phone to this guy and I said, that's so weird. There's a package here for someone that, and he goes, huh, what's the name? And I said the name and he said, that's my wife. And I dropped the phone and I just went, what the fuck? I just started shaking and I said, what do you mean that's your wife? And he goes, she's been having an affair with someone that lives in that suburb and it looks like it's with your husband. And I said, what do you mean? I said, what, is this some sort of joke? He's like, no, it's just a coincidence. I go, it's a pretty big bloody coincidence. And I said, I can't deal with this. So I hung up and I called my ex and I said, you have someone living there already? I've been gone a few weeks. How could you? You've been cheating. I was furious and jealous. He'd been trying to get me back the whole time and he was getting deliveries for someone. I don't know if she was living there then, but it had only been a few weeks. My ex called me and he said, you don't know what you've done. He started yelling at me through the phone. So you don't know what you've done here, what the position. That guy that she's married to is really actually abusive, and violent or whatever. And, how did you find him and why are you telling him this stuff? And I said, I went on a date with him. I was dating him. What the fuck? What is going on? He went into a full tirade and he's like, I'm going to make it sure that you never see your child again. I'm coming over. He's like, you're fucked. You're never going to get away with this. You don't know what you've done. I'm gonna fucking, he said it under his breath, but it was like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, like that. And he'd never done that before. And I absolutely don't remember anything. I remember snippets of getting through the door and I was just hysterical and I had an absolute full mental breakdown. Just was crying hysterically because I thought he was coming to kill me. Thankfully, my daughter was not there. I would never put her in any risk. I called 000 and I said, my ex-husband, I'm leaving a domestic violence situation. I said, he's just threatened to come and kill me. I'd never seen him escalate to this. I apparently was found on the floor in the fetal position holding a knife to protect myself. In that time, the police had come, and at the same time, he had shown up, and he was wearing a uniform from a very popular sporting club and talked to the cops and told them that I had called him and said I was going to kill myself. And I was a mental health risk. And so when they came into my house and found me on the floor, fetal, crying, holding a knife, because I thought he was coming to kill me, yes, that I was a mental health suicide risk. And so I had the police come in and they called an ambulance. And I kept saying to them, no, you're not listening. This is what's trying to happen. He got to them first very calmly, said, oh, mate, I'm really worried about her. And, she's had this before. And, well, we're going through a divorce and I'm really concerned about it because, I left her. Did the full spiel. And that was enough, apparently, to get me taken off under a psych hold. So I tried telling the police what he was going to do. They're like, do you have any proof? And I'm like, no, because he's not dumb enough to send me texts or leave voicemails. He was only ever voice to voice over the phone or in person. He's way too smart for that. And so I went to hospital and was put in a room. It was ER sort of emergency thing, and a psychiatrist quickly sort of came down, and I explained the whole story to him. And he looked at the cops and he went, "What the fuck are you doing? Go and arrest him. She's leaving a domestic violence situation. And, how can you not see this?" And the cops were like, oh. So I was really disappointed in that whole system and experience. And I knew that I would never be able to share my story or seek any kind of accountability for what had happened. I've only told, I think, like two people that story in my life. So the one time I was actually asking for help, the one time I actually needed help and legitimately feared for my life, I was made out to be crazy. There were numerous occasions where I wished he'd hit me, because then at least people would believe me of what I was going through, and I could believe myself what I was going through, because that sense of is this really happening? Like the gaslighting and you lose every part of your decision making construct in your brain of knowing what's actually real and what's not. Going, did I say that? Did I not say that? I didn't do that. All of that. It puts such doubt, and it's so deep seated, and it's took me a long time to recover from that. Yeah, it was an overwhelming feeling. Every time I tried to think, wait, am I doing the right thing? It just went, no thinking, just doing. This is what's happening. Because I knew if I stopped to think about it, I would second guess everything and talk myself out of it and stay. The feeling was so strong within me that I just went, I just have to roll with it. My mum was like, have you given it a shot, bro? Is this the best thing? You're going to be alone, and, you're going to have no security. And was trying to talk me out of it in a sense. But I think that generation was sort of like, if you're not getting beaten black and blue, it's kind of like, do you have to leave? Because look at your life and stuff. So I just went, like, narrow vision, just goal ahead, just focus on my child and set up a life, and then grieve when I can, and then finding out he obviously had someone either living there or was seeing someone so quickly was the nail in the coffin. I think there were, up until that point, there had been that, oh, maybe we'll get back together, that sort of thing. I called my mum. She went, what really happened? Absolute bullshit. I did not want to say anything in front of him, but he called me saying that, you tried this, and I knew that was absolute bullshit. And I went, thank God you know me so well, because it was. And I said, this is what really happened. She said, come down here. And so I went down there to my parents and spent a few days down there and, recovering and stuff. But I was still working with him at this point. I was a contractor, and I had a commitment to my employer to see out my contract. And it was only another maybe 2 months. But I had to tell them, and I said, listen, so and so and I are not together anymore. I can't be in an environment where he is around. I didn't say anything about what had happened. I just said that I am not in a position to be in an environment where he is around. And they said, okay, cool. So I go in, I'm sitting in a meeting room waiting for my boss. My ex walked past the window. He's not supposed to be there. Black eyes, death stares me through the window. And I just lose it, like burst into tears, start shaking. After that, obviously, the incident, I was terrified. And my boss came in, he went, what's going on? And I just went, he's not supposed to be here. And I said, he cannot be within, I had gone to a lawyer in this stage and gotten an AVO, a pending AVO, that if there was any, I said, let's just leave it for now. But as soon as he does something, if he tries to communicate or anything like that, I would instill the AVO. That AVO would mean he would lose his job just around his sort of type of role. And I knew that there would be huge repercussions to me if I went through with that. So again, another level of threat that I knew I had to be very, very careful with how this played out, because if his image was altered in any way, because they're so image conscious in public. If his job was jeopardized in any way, that I would be paying for it in some way, shape, or form for however long. And I thought the only way I can actually just get over this and move on and be relatively unscathed and not have him in my life or the fear of, any sort of retribution was just play the game, keep my fucking mouth shut, keep my head down. So I never said anything. I never went through with the AVO. If he had threatened me again or anything like that, of course I would have. But he knew as well. He knew that I could have gone that route. And I didn't say anything, kept my mouth shut. And I was basically told by the HR person and my boss of, you're doing the right thing. Let's not make this into something because it's just going to be harder on you. And I was fresh out of making a scene and ending up at, you know, the hospital talking to a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. So I was not going to make a scene. And so I didn't. I went, yep, sign it all away, whatever. I went, nope, not going to make a scene. They were covering his ass. They knew. All of them knew deep down. It's very much a boys' club still and will protect their own. And I was just a contractor. I was a nobody. And I could be trusted just to walk away quietly, which I did. I got a call and it was a girl who worked at the club at the place. And she was in HR, I believe, or in operations or something. And she said, I know nobody has asked you this today, so I need to know, are you okay? And I just burst into tears with thank and joy that someone could see what was going on. And she went, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do anything. She's like, I want you to know that I know. And I was just so grateful to her for saying that to me. She's like, I know you're losing your job and everything, but just know that I know. And I knew before any of this, I could tell what sort of person he is. And that was so amazing to me. That was honestly life-changing to me. And I've never spoken to her since. I couldn't even tell you her name, but that just was enough to make me go, it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. And that was a quick little phone call, just changed my life like that. That I wasn't invisible and what happened wasn't invisible. And although I'll never get any acknowledgement or apology or anything from anyone involved with it all, I knew that that was enough for me. We went into some sort of negotiation about settlement, all the rest of it, and I just let my lawyer do it. And my lawyer was like, we can go to the press, let's do this. I went, no, whatever he offers, we're walking away. Because I knew he was damage controlling and telling everyone I was a gold digger. That was going to be his story. I still don't know what he told people. But every single person that I had in my life that was associated with him, I had to delete and block every single person. And after you get a bit isolated in these relationships because they try anyone that they deem that they can't manipulate, they're a threat. And so they isolate them from you. So I'd lost a lot of my friends. Still to this day, I've lost a lot of my friends because of this. It's very manipulative and charming in those sorts of ways with everyone else. So my best thing I could do was to just leave, cut everyone off, and heal. Take time to heal. Yeah, and that's what's hardest, I think, is that he didn't lose anything. I've only told 2 people this in my life. It's not something I talk about. It's embarrassing. It's shameful for me. It brings up a lot of hurt and pain and all the rest of it. And just that I was so gullible or, how it ended up. And I just felt like a fool and trusting someone again, just felt like an utter fool in thinking that someone would have good intentions and actually cared, and was asking for the right reasons about these sorts of things, not trying to dig dirt, obviously, on this person for his own gain. Yeah, just the whole thing is shame. But you've been manipulated for years to feel like that. It's all very calculated. I just felt like a fool that these people were manipulating me, yet I was the one completely broken, absolutely broken from it all mentally, because that's not how I operate. I thought, how gullible can one person be? Look what I'm leaving. And then to see how quickly I was manipulated again by someone. And I'm like a stupid person, you know. I'm
Mm.
intelligent and definitely was then too trusting of people. I'm not now, but I was then. But I still considered myself to be intelligent, successful, reasonably put together, all the rest of it, from a good family. But the whole thing was just awful. And I met with her, the new partner. I said, "You're jumping from one oven into another oven." And she said, your level of what you consider abuse is probably different to most people. She's downplayed it. And I just said, "Well, don't say I didn't warn you."
What do you
Or what do you
think
think
intelligent
intelligent
women
women
misunderstand
misunderstand
about
about
coercive and
coercive and
controlling
controlling
relationships?
relationships? That it can happen to them. It's not about intelligence. They they target people that are like me, like them, like us, highly empathetic, but very intelligent and often very successful people. It's more fun that way, apparently. But just trust your gut. Anything that feels too good to be true now, it is. And just trust that gut. If it happens once, it's going to happen again and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. I've thought about this so many times. Would I have married him? Would I go through that again? And I honestly don't know. You stay because it's not all bad. Do you know what I mean? If it was all bad, everyone would leave. It would be simple. But the highs are so high and it's so good and your life is so incredible. And nobody's made you feel like this before. And I still crave that. I crave that feeling to this day. It's 8 years yesterday, 8 years yesterday I left.
So would you
And
say
would you
to
say
her
to
that
her
you
that you
understand why she
understand why she,
stayed?
yeah. Yeah, and I'd probably forgive her and tell her, don't beat yourself up too much because you did what you felt was right at the time. And that turned out not to be right. I don't love the fact that I've been twice married and divorced, but I think when people actually understand the scenario and the story, I don't really talk about it much these days. Try not to dwell too much in that. I definitely would just say to myself, just don't be so hard on yourself and think that, how could you have fallen for this? It was the best 4 years of your life and it was the worst 4 years of your life. But the impact that it's had 8 years later is still there. It will always be there. I think once you've gone through anything of that level of trauma with someone that you've loved more than life itself, that doesn't exist. It's not real. That manipulation, that person that they created themselves to be in those first 6 months, a year. And dating's boring. Like normal people, like sensible, normal, safe people, that's boring. You chase that level of what you want to feel that again. You have to accept that that's not love. Love should be safe and calm. And I always say, I want to be crazy in love. Never again. I never want to be crazy in love again. I just want to be calm and at peace in love. I've had relationships since, obviously, and long term sorts of things. But I know myself so well now from going through all this and my boundaries and what to look for. And I see those red flags very quickly. And so I'm a pretty harsh taskmaster. I've created a life for myself. And that was always the thing. That was his way of getting to me when I was leaving was, what good are you going to be to anyone? The only good you are to anyone is on your back and occasionally in the kitchen, which I laugh about now. He's like, you don't earn enough without me. You'll have no career success. You'll have nothing, you know. And I don't know whether that's been a bit of a driving force between, since then for myself, but I'm
But
probably a little bit too independent, very hyper independent, and I've gone forward and gotten more qualifications and done really well in my career without him. I own my own place, I own investment properties, and I am very happy on my own. And I have a wonderful, amazing relationship with my first husband and his wife and our daughter 8 years later still, because I don't suffer fools and I've created a life that I'm so happy in, even if it was initially as revenge, but it's become reality. Unfortunately, we live in a similar area still and have to physically see them driving past, things like that. But I don't feel like I'm going to throw up anymore, which is good, like I did in the early days. Time doesn't heal all wounds, it just makes it easier to live with. But I've dated a lot. I've gotten to know a lot of people. I've met some absolutely incredible people. I've got 3 male best friends who I met through dating, whom I adore and are a wonderful support for me. But I'm just not going to suffer fools easily. And I've created a life and friendships and a life and a career that I'm really happy in. And that to me is the best revenge. I'm never going to get the closure or acknowledgement or apology or anything from that situation from anyone involved, particularly him. So all I can do is just go on, go, do you know what? I'm not going to let this affect the rest of my life. Having met a lot of people over the last X amount of years, there's a lot of guys that lie. So, what does safe love look to me? It would look like I feel that I'm able to trust again. And I don't know if I have been since, because the person I loved most in this world betrayed me in such a way and then disposed of me like I was nothing. And it would have to be a slow burn and really someone that understood my past. And I'm not the sort of person that brings it up every day. It's like, no, very clear with my boundaries, but didn't have them initially. And I found myself in a relationship with someone who was volatile again. And I could see where it was going to go. And that was done very quickly. Name calling, any erratic behavior like that, any kind of volatility. If you do it once, I don't care if you've been drinking, whatever. Once, you're dead to me. You call me a name, you yell at me, you scream at me, something like that, you're done. Cut off, never to be seen. And that's my boundaries. So I would like to be completely emotionally vulnerable in a relationship and soft and warm and feminine, because I am quite closed off for a period of time and it would have to be a slow burn. But I'm not sitting around waiting for someone, that's for sure. I'm having a great life and living and very happy and have an amazing life. And I'm very fortunate. But it took a lot of heartache and heartbreak and fuck ton of bravery to get to this point. I long for connection, for emotional intimacy and that connection with someone. I've got some insanely entertaining stories of my dating disasters, but I don't much these days because, an online dating app world that's not conducive really with my level of person I would want to meet. I don't think my person would be on an app. Thankfully, I'm okay with being alone. I like my own company, I'm a bit of a homebody. My ex was more concerned about how I could have affected his image. You'll never get between someone and how they want to be perceived in their image. That is the most important thing. If you're a threat to that in any way, watch out. That was all carefully constructed because he thought that was enough. I would never leave that. And I think that's probably where I don't know if he even realizes now, that's where he underestimated me. Is that, yeah, I love that stuff. Who wouldn't want to live in a beautiful home and have amazing holidays and in this social life and no financial worries? Who wouldn't want like that? But unfortunately for him,
mm,
you know, wasn't enough to keep me.
I'm wondering
I'm
what
wondering
it's
what it's
like for you
like for
to
you about
stay.
it today. I've done plenty of work and therapy and all sorts of things on myself and healing. And I've told people in the past about this sort of story, but not many people and not really in depth, because I never want to be a victim. I never want to be perceived as a victim. And that's my own pride or something, I guess. I don't know. But if I feel like a victim, then I feel like he's won. And that's not going to fucking happen. You know, not with me. You do it with all these other wives, but not to me. Knowing that this is going to be broadcast and other people can hear it, I hope if there are women in a similar situation, and if there's even just one person that resonates with this and it provides them with any kind of sense of comfort or strength or motivation to get out of the situation that they're in, and that domestic violence is not just black eyes, it's at all levels, it's at all professions, particularly the high level ones: surgeons, athletes, pilots, CEOs, highest rate of sociopathic or narcissistic disorders. So if it just reaches at least one person that's questioning themselves or questioning, it's not that bad, it doesn't physically hit me, is it in my head? Am I being dramatic? That just listen to your gut. You know, in yourself what is right and what is wrong. And if you even have to question that, then that's your answer.
Thank you to listeners today. Her is a production of Wise Woman Studio. If you'd like to support opportunities for women to break the silence of harmful relationships and systems, please like and subscribe. This is your host, Dee. See you next time.